The Liberal budget passed late last week despite Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's pledge to block it.
Yesterday I spoke for 4 hours to stop the inflationary tax hiking Trudeau budget because I believe we're headed to a very serious crisis.
After the Bank of Canada rate hike last week, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland tried to reassure Canadians.
The Canadian economy is strong and resilient, and more Canadians have good jobs today than ever before.
But with interest rates going up and an increase in the unemployment rate, are we heading into turbulent times? Joining us now are economist Armine Yalnizyan, an Atkinson Fellow on the future of workers, and Kevin Page, former parliamentary budget officer and president of the Institute for Fiscal Studies and Democracy at the University of Ottawa. Thank you both so much for joining us today. This is a topic that everyone is talking about because affordability really affects all Canadians. It's something that people are talking about around their dinner tables, at their water coolers at work, on their Zoom calls. And one of the big issues or topics this week certainly was the decision by the Bank of Canada to hike interest rates again. Kevin, I know this has been divisive inside the economic community on whether it's the right move or the wrong move. What's your take?
Yeah, I think my take, Mercedes, is we're at the end of this sort of tightening cycle. It was questionable whether we needed this additional 25 basis points. I think the governor of the Bank of Canada decided, just looking at some recent data, that there was still too much demand pressure in the economy. And that was going to slow the process of getting inflation back to its target range, 1% to 3%.
Armine, what's your thoughts? Right decision or wrong decision? Does it make things worse or better?
From my point of view, I agree with Kevin that it was a 50-50 call, and I think they made the wrong call. You know, Canada's inflation rate is the lowest in any G7 country except for Japan, and their food inflation is higher. And we were the first amongst all the countries to start tightening rates. Actually, the second, the UK beat us by a couple of months, and we were the first to pause for this long. So you needed a good reason to stop the pause. We were already actually helping wrestle inflation to the ground. And I just didn't see enough in the data to merit this increase.
Kevin, do you think it didn't sound like they were willing to rule out another hike in the future? Is that potentially on the table as well?
Yeah, I think the Bank of Canada will say they're going to be data dependent, so they'll be monitoring data. If they see price data that is just that is worrisome from their point of view, it still suggests that we're going to be above the target for a long period of time. That maybe we can get another rate increase, but actually I think the odds are that this is it now in this current cycle, barring some unanticipated event.
Armine, what's the effect of a rate hike like this?
Well, it certainly does continue to cool the economy, and we already saw the unemployment rate titch above 5%, which is what the Bank of Canada explicitly said. The Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem explicitly said he wanted to see. He thought 5% was too low an unemployment rate. Well, given demographics, it was going to be hard to change that unless you tried to create pain and maybe engineer a recession. But we've been pouring people into the economy. It's hard to shrink an economy when you add as many people as we have. That's one of the reasons why GDP has grown as robustly as it has. So I hope they're not moving towards another rate hike. I think that's possibly in the cards because both the ECB and that's the European Central Bank, and the Federal Reserve next week are highly anticipated to raise rates. And I don't think we are at the end of this tightening cycle yet. And I think that's going to create a lot of pain, particularly in the housing market, particularly for the people who have just arrived and for our youngest workers who are also just knocked out of the labor market in the summer season when that doesn't usually happen, and are finding it harder to find and keep apartments now. It's a pretty deadly cycle.
In this cycle where we're talking about interest rates and inflation going up, we have not seen people's salaries going up at the same time, Kevin. So at what point does that balance out, or do they push deliberately into some kind of a mild recession that Armine was referencing there, which obviously would have pretty negative impacts for a lot of people, but might balance out the economy?
Yeah, so I think we've seen some growth in hourly earnings. It's now on a year-over-year basis, it's over 5%. But to your point, it's not kept pace with inflation, so people have had what we call these real wage losses. So it's going to hurt the household balance sheets, which actually for the most part are pretty strong because of just enormous transfers that went into the system in 2020-21. And I think, in that period of time, there's a lot of savings as well because people didn't have opportunities to really spend money. So I think, yeah, the consumer is the one that is going to be hurt by this, 25 basis points. I think they're being hurt by these high food prices, but the carrying costs of these mortgages is showing up in these really high shelter price increases as well.
We've seen this, Armine, becoming an increasing political issue, of course, because, people are concerned about their pocketbooks. They want to hear from politicians. Pierre Poilievre vowed not to allow the budget to pass. Of course, it did pass successfully. There's been some criticism on that budget on both the right and the left. The left say there were not enough social programs to help people who are suffering, not enough money going into the economy. On the right, they say it's too much money going into the economy that could overstimulate, and things like the carbon tax shouldn't be going up at a time when people are already struggling to pay their bills. Your thoughts on the budget passing and what federal politicians are basically trying to pin on each other?
I'm not going to weigh in on the politics of it, but what is absolutely clear from what is happening in the marketplace on shelter costs and food costs is that we need governments to step up to the plate too. Not just the federal, but the federal government is the most important to backfill this difference in construction costs that is stalling out construction of purpose-built affordable housing at exactly the time when the federal government is bringing in more people into the country. So I think there is a greater onus on the federal government to be coherent across its range of policies to, yes, welcome more people. We need them because business says we don't have enough people. So if you're going to meet that need, you got to make sure they have someplace to live. And because of what the Bank of Canada is doing, they need to step up to the plate. But it isn't just a federal thing, it's also a provincial and municipal thing. Housing is the number one thing governments can be doing more about. And there are even a few things they can be doing about food prices. For example, there is a mandate letter item in the minister responsible for children that says we should have a school food program. And Canada is the only country in the G7 and the 37th out of 41 countries that doesn't, of the 41 richest countries, that does not have a national school food program. It wouldn't fix everything, but it would make sure our kids are eating at least nutritious food once a day at a time when higher housing costs are really strapping families, especially newcomer families on whom we are relying.
Kevin, the federal government has spent a lot over the years, and they defend that. Some economists say that it's made the situation worse. Do you think that the federal government's budget is going to improve the situation, or is it going to exacerbate it?
Yeah, I think, by and large, I think our fiscal position, if we look at the size of these deficits, we look at the spending and revenue track, we're in pretty good shape. We're talking about a deficit around $40 billion in Canada. It's about at 1.5 percentage points of GDP. We're pretty much holding it flat, even if this slowdown. We had growth of about 3.5% last year. We're talking about growth 1% this year, and we're holding a deficit constant. And we'll get some revenue loss as a result of this weakness in the economy. So I think from the point of view as monetary and fiscal policy kind of working together to kind of reduce the rate of growth of inflation, I think from the point of view of fiscal stance, I think we're not in a bad place. But it's on the other hand, it's healthy to have a leader of the official opposition argue against the government, argue for balanced budgets, complain about these price increases or tax increases on carbon, because then you get debate. And I think people want choice, and the budget is passing. I think we're overall in pretty good position.
We just have a few moments left, but I want to quickly get each of your takes on whether or not the carbon tax should be going up, starting with you, Armine.
I think at a time when the country is burning and we're not sure what the future is existentially, we need to do something very serious about climate change. And a carbon tax is something that had at one point cross-party support. So let's just do something. Let's not stop doing the things we can do.
Kevin?
Yeah, we need to have prices on carbon. These prices need to be increasing. People need to know, and we need to have this sort of forward guidance on what these prices are going to be. So, it's not something I would take away even in this period. These increases in carbon taxes, we need to make these adjustments. It's a long-term consideration.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. I'm sure a lot of folks didn't want to hear that on the carbon tax, but it's great to have two economists' perspective on that. And this is certainly an issue we'll be following up on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We'll be back after this with one last thing.